One. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Trauma Informed Education. My name is Gavin Krishnamurthy, and I'm here as always with Dr. Kay. Hi, Kay. How are you?
I'm well, Govind. How are you going?
I'm good. Happy 2021. This is our first episode for the year, and we're so excited to have Kim here with us. Kim, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So we might just dive right in and get to the first question. So as you know, this podcast is for educators. We wanted to start by asking you about perhaps where you went to school and if it has any influence on the work you do today.
Okay, yeah, so interesting first question. Takes me back rather a long time now. I was a product of the grammar school system, and my sister wasn't. So I had a first-hand experience of how divisive that can be and how that stays with you for life. So I passed the 11 plus, she didn't, so she went to the local secondary school. And it has so many different influences, doesn't it, your school experience? I mean, I know my first year at high school was very much around, am I really going to be able to live up to this? You know, we were told we were the elite of the elite and we were going to, you know, and it's like, okay, no pressure there then. And my sister had the opposite experience of being told she wasn't good enough. And, you know, whilst I'm the academic one of the family, she's the really creative one. And she's always minimized that as, you know, a skill, as a, you know, as intelligence. And, you know, the school system can do that to you right back there. So yeah, first-hand experience of that, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The whole spectrum of things. I think you can kind of compare the pressures. It's different in its own way, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, you know, a lack of understanding of how children are experiencing these things and a lack of curiosity. I think we'll probably talk a lot about curiosity in this podcast, but a lack of curiosity about what is the experience for you of passing or failing the 11 plus. What does that mean for you? What's your experience moving into secondary school? Having done that test, you know, luckily there's less of that around now, but it is still out there.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a new system here in Australia. Oh, well, in Queensland, I should say. So there's a lot of angst. So I can relate to that.
Right.
A lot of a lot of angst. We like to ask all our kind of guests their sort of understanding and take of how they make sense of trauma and interpersonal trauma. I was also curious about how you conceptualize this idea of blocked care that you discuss in your book.
Blocked trust, I think you're thinking about. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah. So I guess we need to think about trauma, and gosh, we're all thinking about trauma over the last 12 months, aren't we? You know, the whole world has had a big trauma impact on them with the pandemic. And, you know, it's very much a trauma that is outside of the family, and children experience the family as being a protection against that trauma. Children have their family members they feel safe, they feel connected with their family members, and that helps them to manage what is a very unsafe situation for all of us. So if we think about trauma like that, and then think about trauma that comes from within those family relationships rather than outside of the family relationships, you're taking away that protection. You're taking away the people who can support you through these traumatic events. Yeah. So if the trauma comes from within the parenting you experience, who protects you? Who comforts you? Who can you turn to when in need? Who can you trust who's got your back? Yeah. And you can't, because you turn to the people who should be there protecting you and comforting you, and they're the ones that are scaring you, frightening you. No judgment of the parents. There's all sorts of reasons why that might happen, and I'm not making any judgments here, but the experience for the child is a profound sense of mistrust in the parenting they're experiencing and in the relationships that should be helping them to feel safe in the world. And when that's pervasive, when that goes on for a long time, starting early in life, it becomes a block to trust other relationships. So whether you move to well, whether your parents are in a better position to now keep you safe and protected, or whether you're moving to alternative parents, or whether you're moving out into the world, going into school, all relationships become a source of threat. And that's what we mean by block trust. It has a biological substrate, so that I won't go into too much detail, but if you look at Dan Hughes and John Balin's work, who've done a lot of work on block trust, you'll see that this is in your nervous system. This is not just about a learnt behavior. It's something much more profound than that. A profound sense of, I can't find anyone to trust in the world, so I have to do this myself.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had another question just related to that about how you saw, we hear a lot about attachment styles and how that plays out in children. And I wondered how you thought about the role of block trust and how it what it might look like in sort of the various types of insecure attachment styles. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I guess if you're going to think about attachment, you also have to think about intersubjectivity. Two sides of relationship experience that children need early in life. So they need their attachment, and we've just been talking about attachment figures, although I didn't name it as such, people who can offer you comfort at times of distress or discomfort. Children also need reciprocal relationship experience. So people who can share with you their experience of you and the experience of the world, so the child learns about themselves and the world through the eyes of their parent, and that's a more reciprocal part of the relationship experience. So if we're going to think about block trust, we need to think about the impact on both of those. So the impact on attachment, as you say, is about having insecure attachment. I cannot feel safe. I don't have a source of comfort to turn to reliably. And so I find ways to adapt to that. And that's what we mean by insecure attachment or disorganized attachment at the more extreme. I'm finding different ways to feel safe in the world because the secure pattern, I feel wobbly, I turn to you, you make me less wobbly, is not available. So children will learn different ways of adapting to that. And we know people will be familiar with avoidant, where we become more self-reliant, more self-sufficient, or ambivalent, where we become more attachment needy. Those are the kind of two predominant styles of insecure attachment. And then disorganized is taking those styles to a more extreme position. And alongside that, if you're working so hard to feel soothed in terms of attachment experience, in terms of feeling emotionally wobbly, if you're having to work so hard, what you can't then do is relax and enjoy the reciprocal relationships, which may or may not be available to you, in order to go out and explore the world. So it impacts on everything that a young child needs in terms of their relationship experience.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for talking about intersubjectivity. I wanted to get to your book in a second, Kim. I'm quite excited about it, but wanted to ask you about the dyadic developmental psychotherapy that your book was based on. How would you describe the approach and I think the kind of the more practical kind of components of PACE, I think that comes from that.
Okay, well, dyadic developmental psychotherapy, as its name suggests, was originally a therapy model developed by Dan Hughes over in America. He's a clinical psychologist working with adopted foster children and finding the usual ways of providing therapy for these children wasn't helping them. So Dan being Dan, he set out and found his own model, very much based on the things we've been talking about, very much based on the experience of children who've missed out on healthy relationship experience early in life and trying to find ways of recovering for them that healthy relationship experience later in life, or in his case with foster adoptive parents. So he developed the model, he developed the way of working. He called it dyadic developmental psychotherapy. Dyadic, to really give a nod to that we can't work with the children on their own. We need to work with the children and their parents, safe parents, so that they can recover the relational experience and the trust. We talked about block trust, the trust in relational experience that the children didn't have early in life. So the dyadic represents that. The developmental, because it's so much based on our understanding of child development and helping children have a successful developmental pathway, is fundamental to the model. And psychotherapy, because it was a therapy model. When he started training, particularly over in the UK, actually, he came over and started training a lot of us in this model. And we went out and started training in turn over time. What we found is a lot of people were coming to our level 1 trainings who weren't therapists, and they were interested in social work practice, education, residential care, all sorts of reasons for coming. They're really excited by this model, but we're now training people who weren't therapists. So how could we call it a psychotherapy? So we realized we had to broaden the whole model, with Dan's blessing, into what we now call dyadic developmental practice. So we have dyadic developmental psychotherapy, dyadic developmental parenting, and dyadic developmental practice, to try and just move away from this is much, much more than a therapy model. The therapy is still there, but around the therapy is a parenting model. Around that is a systems model. Education will be part of that. Can we bring the same principles into all the environments that the children are living in? Education, schools being a particularly important part of that environment.
Yeah, that's great. And I've had the privilege of listening to Dan in some of the other workplaces, and I remember just copiously writing notes on everything he says.
Yes.
Such an engaging and interesting speaker too.
Yes, he is, and he talks from the heart, and it's very compelling to listen to him talking about it. And you asked about PACE as well. Sorry, I forgot about that. PACE is the attitude that is central to the DDP model. It's an attitude that's very much based on what we offer in terms of healthy relationship experience to our young children, where we offer them an attitude of playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. We're interested in their inner worlds. We're interested in what's going on within them, what they're thinking, feeling. If you have a conversation with a baby, and we can all imagine having a conversation with a baby, we have the words, they don't, but all our words are around what's going on inside them. Yeah. Hello, baby. Oh, you're feeling happy today. Oh, no, now you're a bit upset. We talk about what's going on internally. And we tend to do that infancy, toddlers quite naturally, and then it tends to fade away, which is quite sad in a way. We expect children to know their inner world, and we don't need to make sense of it for them anymore. I think all children, still all of us, like to have our inner world made sense of by others. So it's so PACE is an attitude that can apply to all relationships. Somehow we lose that. In our parenting of our children, we become preoccupied by other things, I think. And what Dan realised is, if we're going to help children heal from relational traumas, then this is absolutely critical. This making sense of their internal world in a playful, accepting, curious and empathic way is absolutely central to helping them to start to feel understood and to start to learn to trust that others have got them and got their back. Is that an expression you have in Australia, to have someone's back? Yeah.
I'll throw to Kay in a second. I was just reflecting on the way you described the whole process of making sense of your inner world, and I was thinking about some of the trainings and things that you yourself do, and we might do with teachers, where a lot of it is about taking them into how the child must be feeling and thinking. That might be very counterintuitive in many ways, I think. And I think from a very broad way, that's most of what we're trying to do to help them do, is to be able to make sense and think about and mentalize, I guess, how the child's feeling and thinking.
Yeah, it is. I think it's counterintuitive because of the way we've been socialized. And I think obviously I'm more familiar with the UK environment that we grow up in. I don't think it's dissimilar in Australia. That sense of let's make the difficult stuff go away, rather than let's sit with it, let's sit with the uncomfortableness. So when a child is distressed, good parenting feels like making the distress go away. You're okay, we don't need to be making a fuss. And actually, we've got that wrong. Actually, to really help a child and to really help another colleague, another human, you know, people want to be understood and heard, and they want people to sit with them where it's uncomfortable. You know, if you were expressing a level of sadness about a recent event to me, what you don't want me to come in and say, it will be all right, you know, by next week, you know, this will be in the past, why are you worrying? What you want is someone to say, that sounds really tough, you're having a really hard time right now, and I get it, and I think it's making you very worried. I think maybe it's making you worried about, you know, that feels good. That feels, oh, you get it, you understand. I feel a bit better because I know someone else understands what I'm going through. That's the heart of PACE. The PACE is, you know, sitting in a compassionate way with another person's experience. And sadly, I think, you know, it won't be true all the way around the world, but you know, sadly, so many of our ways of being have become much more dominated by, let's make this stuff go away, let's problem solve, let's reassure, let's get you out of this. And we don't take the time to slow down. Within DDP, we talk a lot about slowing down, and we don't take the time to slow down. Let me listen to you, let me hear your story, let me know your story, let me share back with you what I'm hearing about your story, let me add a little bit with my curiosity into your story, so we really, really fully understand the experience you're going through. And then, yes, maybe some reassurance or some problem solving might be really helpful to you. But let's slow down and do that first. And that's what fundamentally DDP is about.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated to hear how you translate that to the school context. But I'll just throw to Kay if any questions or comments you might have.
No, I was just thinking as you were saying that from an educator's point of view, we tend to, especially when we've got challenging behaviour in front of us, we tend to think. I remember Laura Riffle said this when we interviewed her. She said that one of the key things she says to teachers is, you don't always have to act immediately. You know, of course, if their child was unsafe or something was dangerous, that's different. But just because something's disrupting at the moment for you, you don't have to jump in immediately and do something. You can just stop and keep, you know, and just, and I was thinking of that as you said, that it's wonderful that there is the practice element, because for a teacher who naturally does that sort of behaviours, it gives a really clear teacher type framework of what this looks like for me and how I actually do it. Because in the work that in working with Govind as an educator and him being a psychologist, the word therapy immediately brings up, but I'm not a therapist. What if I do something wrong? I can't do a therapeutic thing because I'm not trained. That's not for me. That's for somebody else. And you tend to quickly flick the responsibility outside of your classroom because that's not something I know of. Whereas this is a way to bridge that gap and also build the competence of the educator that, hang on a minute, you've got a really important role to play here and you can do it. So you can do it this way. And as you've said, we're very also in general very quick to go, no, let's just fluff over that and move on, rather than, like you say, sitting with it. And it's okay. You know,
and it's understandable, isn't it? Because we have goals, we have outcomes we need to achieve. You know, teachers have a whole classroom of children that need educating, and it can feel, how have I got time to do this? You're asking me to slow down, but I've only got so many hours in the day, and I've got so many children to attend to. And I guess slowing down doesn't have to take a long time. I think that's an important message, because I think when we talk about slowing down, people imagine, you know, I have to spend half an hour with this pupil making sense of. Actually, slowing down is really just about saying, have I understood? And do I need to seek a bit more understanding here? And that can come through just with an acknowledgement to the child, you're having a really hard day and I'm here. That doesn't have to take very long. I mean, one of my children in school used to have a primary school teacher who would, if he'd noticed a child was struggling, he wouldn't even have a conversation with them. He'd just put a note on their desk.
Yeah,
Just saying, I've noticed. I'm noticing you're struggling today. That's a slowing down, taking the time to notice and to let the young person know that you've noticed is a slowing down. So slowing down doesn't mean hours and hours of I've got to sit and talk to you. A therapist does have the luxury of 50 minutes an hour to really explore in depth someone's experience. But what we're talking about is doing that on the hoof.
Yes.
And that has to be in the moment, has to be small at times, but and I try and avoid the word but because it negates what you've just said. So it doesn't have to take a long time. And you don't have to sit and say, okay, you're having a hard time, we're going to spend the next half an hour figuring out why you're having a hard time. What we are going to focus is it's the acknowledgement you are having a hard time and I'm here if you want to tell me about it. And the child might say, well, it's not fair, miss, because thank you for sharing that. Now I'm understanding why you're having a hard time. I'm still not happy that you hit him, but I'm really understanding why you're having a hard time. Let's have a think about that.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I think that leads into my next question, which comes from your book, Working with Relational Trauma in Schools. So you talk about this idea of the two hands of teaching and having an authoritative teaching style. I wondered if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Hughes initially talked about two hands of parenting, and it's an adaptation of that, really. And he was trying to capture exactly what we were talking about. The phrase connection before correction is the one that people are most familiar with of Dan's phrases. Connection being the emotional connection with the person and the importance of making sure that connection is there if you are going to go on to do anything else. And correction is more about the doing. It isn't about punishment. He wasn't trying to capture that. It's more about, it might be learning, teaching, it might be discipline, it might be actually changing something that I'm doing because what I'm doing with you is not working. So the correction is the action you were talking about earlier, the doing. The connection is the connection. It's what it says on the tin. It's the emotional relationship I have with you, which will help the doing happen more successfully. So he represented that as two hands, as I say, initially as two hands of parenting, but we can easily extend that into education and have it as two hands of supporting pupils in school, supporting pupils with their education. So we have the connection in one hand, which includes the warmth, the empathy, the nurture, the curiosity about your internal experience. All of that fits into, so I don't know if you can see the hand on the screen, fits into that hand. And then, but there is also some doing that we need to do. At the end of the day, you did hit your colleague, your peer, and that isn't an acceptable way of doing it. We do need to think about how we can make sure that doesn't happen again. We do need to think about how can we help you repair the relationship with your peer. So we do have some doing that is important for children. But if we do that alongside the connection, the child will find it much easier to do, will engage with it, they will be less defensive. If they're less defensive, they're much more likely to learn from the experience we're supporting them with. And we want a child to learn how to manage conflict with peers without hitting them. Or just going straight to the correction, here's a consequence for hitting, will make them defensive. I'm feeling like a bad kid. I don't like feeling like a bad kid. They may go into shame. An experience of shame takes you away from any learning about the world because it becomes very self-focused. So all we've done is help the child to move into a state of shame within which learning can't happen. So they're not going to learn how to resolve conflict. If we can put the other hand in there, connect with them, make sense of their experience. So what was going on for you that got you so angry? Remembering that being angry is a feeling which is neither right nor wrong, it just is. So I can accept that non-judgmentally. You were angry. Okay, help me understand that. And then to empathize with that. I get it. I get now. Yeah, he wouldn't let you join in the game. Yeah, I can see why that would make you feel angry. Your anger makes sense to me. Yeah. However, we've also got to think about what happened after that. Yeah, you hit your peer, you hit your friend. And if we've done that connection well, the child is already there saying, I don't want my friend to be upset. And now we can say, okay, what are we going to do about this? Yeah. And in the book, you'll see I talk about collaborative consequences rather than coercive consequences. So rather than the adult impose a consequence on the child, it's something that we can do together. Let's figure this out. Let's figure out how we can make this better. And the child will, if they're feeling really supported and understood, will have a million ideas about how to do that. Some of which are totally unrealistic. Yeah, I can give him all my PlayStation games, you know, he can have the lot. Yeah, actually, we don't need to go that far. How about you invite him around to play PlayStation with you, you know, so we can help the child figure out how can I make this better. And consequences that help you repair relationships are going to be the best consequences of all, because you're learning how to deal with people in the world, friendships, relationships. Does that make sense? That's the two.
Absolutely, yeah. It just made me laugh because it reminds me of times when I've spoken to kids and you ask them what the consequence should be, and it's always more punitive and harsh than anything you're doing.
Yeah, ground me for the year. Yeah. Actually, I don't need to do that. How about we do? You know, it's a win-win then, isn't it? Yeah.
I just wanted to say something about the idea of PACE as well in that, you know, in how you were explaining that idea of kind of, you know, helping them feel understood and calming down. You know, and I think I often compare it to, you know, the things that people talk about in terms of de-escalation skills, you know, this idea of bringing people down, and it gets used in different contexts. And now, one of the things I found really powerful about the PACE stuff is that the focus is always on the relationship rather than just calming someone down, that it's always in the interest of understanding them and you know, providing them an experience of feeling understood, which with it comes this, you know, them being co-regulated, or, you know, them kind of coming down themselves, which is a very subtle thing. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, Kim, but it's a very powerful thing, I think, in terms of like talking to kids or talking to anybody really.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's about the relationship being more important than the goal. Yeah. You know, in de-escalation, you have a clear goal. My goal is to calm you down, so life is easier for all of us. So no, it's a reasonable goal. It's not an unreasonable goal. We'd go a step further than that, though. Yeah. My goal is to understand and get to know you. And I'm hopeful that that will also help you calm down and make life easier for all of us. So there's an extra bit, if you like, that DDP and PACE, the attitude of PACE, brings in. We talk about storytelling and finding the story, you know, the story, the narrative, whatever word you want to use for that. I want to understand your experience here. And I'm not just going to come in to calm you down. You know, I can do that. There are techniques for doing that. I'm going to do something additional. I want to help you calm down, but I really want to know you. And I want to know what's going on for you. So I want to discover your story of this moment, your story of this experience. And in understanding that story, I'll have deeper empathy for you. You will receive that empathy. You will feel more deeply understood. And that in itself will help the calming down process. But it will do something also, it'll get your thinking brain working, so we can figure this out. We can figure out what went wrong, and we can figure out what we could do another time. So it's much, much bigger than de-escalation, important as de-escalation is.
Absolutely. And just hearing you say that, I think with de-escalation, often you have the trap of stepping into control and coercion, isn't it? It almost feels like a form of that. Whereas with PACE, I think it's, you know, really about relationship building, care and concern.
Yes, I mean, I think de-escalation at its best isn't controlling.
No.
I think, when people are taught well how to de-escalation techniques, but it is technique focused and it is goal orientated. I think PACE is much broader than that. It's relational focused, and that's the big central element of DDP. It's a relational model. So the relationship is more important than anything else. Not that you ignore everything else. So in schools, so you were talking about education, we have a goal to teach the children. I mean, obviously that's really important. We don't want them to leave school having learned nothing. So that goal is always there. The belief is if we understand our pupils and have a relationship with our pupils, that will calm their nervous systems down for a start. It will help them to feel safe. It will support their emotional well-being. And then they're in a much better learning state. So our secondary goal of teaching them is going to be achieved, which probably sounds a bit weird to educators. Why would the teaching be a secondary goal? But if we think about how we work as human beings, we learn when we're emotionally safe. If we're not emotionally safe, our nervous system puts us in a state to deal with the danger, not to learn. So we have a goal to teach our children, but our primary goal must be to help them to feel safe and emotionally supported so that they can learn. Then we can achieve our goal of teaching them. And unfortunately, that's not always understood. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds really great. I guess the challenge often is putting it into practice. Kim, so in your book, you talk about this idea of practicing in the moment. I was wondering if you could explain that concept and what it means for educators trying to use PACE.
Yeah, and again, it started in a model that I developed with parents in mind, and have translated that into something that that educators can use. And it's really just trying to capture all the things I've just been talking about in a kind of relatively simple model that we can keep in mind. It is the slowing down. It's the slowing down in supporting children. And I just go through a sequence. It doesn't have to be in that order, and you go backwards and forwards. I don't want it to be a do step one, do step two, but it's just trying to capture what does slowing down look like. And if you look at the model, you'll see that it's sort of 7 circles, and the first circle is notice. And as Kay, you were talking about earlier, deal with anything that needs to be dealt with immediately. If Billy and Joe are fighting, we have to break the fight up. You can't go in and be super paceful and understanding and share the story when they're heating each other. We have to do that. So step 1 is always going to be the first step, isn't it? Notice that there's something that needs attending to and do anything immediately for everyone's safety. Then the fast route goes then to, what's the consequence here? You guys were fighting. What's the consequence for your fighting? Okay, detention after school. Yeah, that's the fast route. So what I've tried to do in the model is show what the slow route looks like. Yeah, and surprisingly, in my mind, the next step, I just promised myself I wouldn't use the word steps, but the next part of the process is to notice your own reaction, is to focus on you. And it doesn't have to take very long, but how am I doing in this situation? Am I regulated enough to help these kids? Or do I need to take care of myself? Yeah. If I do need to take care of myself, can I hand over to someone? Because the children need support right now. If I can't, can I at least just take a breath, have compassion for myself, and then focus on the children? And that, breathe, this is hard, it's okay, you're going to struggle, we'll get through it. That compassion for yourself can then allow you to be in a more open and engaged state to the children. So instead of going in and say, what the heck is going on here? You say, hey boys, you're having a hard time today. And apologies, I've been very gender biased there. So boys fighting, it could be girls. But hey guys, you're having a hard time, you two. Let's figure out what's going on here. Yeah. So we have to attend to ourselves within the slowing down. Otherwise, we're not in an open and engaged state to attend to the other person. Then it's really important to think about regulation for the children. Are they regulated or not? If they're not emotionally regulated, there's no point doing anything else because they're not in a state to receive it. We have to put our attention on regulation. So if you don't mind me kind of sticking with them being boys, come on boys, we're going to go for a walk. Yeah, I want you here, let's have a walk and we'll have a think about what's going on. So let's do something to regulate. Yeah. Oh, can you just pick up those books and bring them with you as we walk? Yeah, let's get something heavy, let's get some, so we know from the OTs all sorts of things can help children regulate at a sensory level and at emotional level. My presence is going to help you regulate. And the children calm, we can say, okay, you've had a hard time, let's figure it out. Dan's favorite phrase, let's figure this out. Yeah. And then there's another really important part of this process. Don't go immediately to, I want you to think about the other person. Let's start with you. So if I'm talking to Billy, Billy was really going for, who was the other child? I've forgotten his name, Joe, I think it was, wasn't it? And Billy's really, lashing out at Joe. Yeah. It's no good me saying to Billy, what do you think Joe's feeling right now? He's just going to go straight into shame and defensiveness. Thinking shuts down and I've lost my opportunity. Much better to start with him. What was going on for you? Yeah. What made you so angry? Remembering anger is just a feeling. It's neither right nor wrong. It just is. Yeah. Help me understand why you got so angry. Now I get it. Now I understand. And then you give that back with empathy. That was really hard for you then. If that happened, yeah. Now the child is feeling, okay, you get it. I'm not feeling shame now. Actually, I'm starting to feel a bit of guilt. I'm starting to feel some remorse. Actually, I didn't want to hurt Joe. He's my friend. And I don't kind of know what to do about that. But I'm feeling it. So I'm now receptive to some ideas. And if we move from shame to guilt, guilt allows remorse and the desire to make amends. So now the child is in a receptive state to think about Joe. Yeah, so Joe's really upset with you. Yeah, I don't want him to be upset with me. I wonder what we can do about that. And that takes us to the next part of the sequence, which is, the action. What are we going to do about this? And this is where the collaborative consequence comes in. Yeah. And the adult takes some responsibility here as well. Maybe you guys aren't ready to, play for half an hour together. Maybe you need a bit more supervision, a bit more structure. That's my responsibility as an adult to put that in place. Yeah, maybe there's something you can do that lets Joe know that you're upset that you upset him. Yeah, that lets him know that you want to be friends. I wonder what that could be. Yeah, Joe might not be quite ready to hear it yet. Can you be patient with that? Can we do that? But you might have to be a bit patient until he's ready to do that. Yeah. So that leads us on to the relationship repair part of the sequence, which is the last part. Yeah, and it's about helping the child repair their relationships, and it's also the adult to say, is there anything I need to do to repair? Have I got it wrong at the beginning there. I wasn't so paceful at the beginning. Can I acknowledge, look, I know I was feeling quite cross with it and frustrated with you at the beginning, and that's me, that's down to me. I'm glad we kind of got there in the end. So doing your repair as well. And then you can model to children, repair is a good thing to do. We can always reach out and acknowledge we got something wrong. So it's trying to capture, it's capturing pace. It's pace, well, it's capturing the two hands, isn't it, that I've been talking about, pace being an important part of that. And it's just showing how we slow down in our way of dealing with things. And as I was saying earlier, that, as I just talked you through, would take quite a lot of time, but then that's quite a serious experience that the child needs that time and attention. But we can also whiz through that much more quickly in those kind of moment by moment. I'm just noticing, I want to understand, this is making sense to me. I remember that your mum went into hospital yesterday, so I can understand you're having a hard time. So, we can make some guesses and wondering about why, because of our knowledge of the child, and just you're doing that fed. So it can be a very quick, snappy thing, or it can be a much longer, let's take some time and really think about this together.
That's a really wonderful framework, Kim. And I was thinking about how it's just a very useful kind of framework to even reflect on what you've done, or how many steps you went through, or which one you got right and which one you didn't.
Yeah, where did that work well for me? You know, what am I learning about that? Where did I find it tricky? You know, and noticing your own reactions and taking care of yourself is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let you have a drink.
Talking too much.
I'll throw it at Kay in a minute. It was interesting hearing you talk about the long path and the short path of decision making, and it made me wonder about how, for a teacher to be able to do this, they need to be feeling safe themselves.
Yes.
I know, regulated and calm, but sort of at some level safe with
Yes.
the child and in the environment they're in as well.
Yes, and you know what that speaks to is we need to get these ways of being throughout the school, so everyone's supporting everyone else in a very paceful way. So we build schools that are safe for everyone. So thinking about how I'm not in school, but how staff do supervisions, how they do mentoring, how they do management, how they do peer support, and the well-being of the adults is critical to the well-being of the children. And if we can't put well-being for adults in place, we're not going to get it right for the children. So actually, I've got to look after the adults here. I've got to look after myself here. Am I safe? Because if we're not in a safe world, we all go into our defensive nervous systems, and that never goes well. Yeah.
I like the idea of peaceful schools and peaceful schools. I think that's what
Yes.
I think about it. I'll throw it over to Kay for any thoughts and comments.
Thanks. No, I was just thinking, because I literally was just talking about this with students today, how teachers tend to put themselves last. They don't. Their children always come first, and they're not consciously thinking about themselves. And I think your explanation, where all of a sudden in what do I need to do to help this child? Oh my goodness, I'm at the beginning. That's a whole different way of thinking. And I think it goes then to, as you said, if you've got a school where everybody thinks this way, that bridges that gap of that isolation type of mentality of this child is your problem because he's in your classroom. It helps everybody to say, okay, we need safe and great teachers with great well-being to be able to help each other. Therefore, my first priority as your colleague is to make sure you're okay. Therefore, I can't then say, well, that child is your problem. It speaks to me that
it goes further,
every
doesn't it?
child is everybody's responsibility and concern, because
and I can only do that for you if I look after myself.
Yes,
so
that's right. And then it's like this little domino effect. If you're going to think that way and behave that way, it goes without saying that you'll act that way.
I mean, the common phrase is you put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yes.
I really like the story of the father in the desert, and I don't know where the source of this story came from. I've never been able to track it down, but have you heard it? It's where a father and a son are walking in the desert, and they're lost. They can't find their way out, and they've got one bottle of water. And the son is getting really thirsty because it's really hot, obviously. And the son says to Daddy, can I have some water? I'm really thirsty. And the father says, I'm sorry, my lad, but I'm going to drink the water. But Daddy, that's not fair. I'm thirsty. Why are you drinking the water? Well, it's like this, son. If I drink the water, I'll keep myself going and I can get us out of this desert. If I give you the water, I won't be able to do that. Yeah. And I just love that story for there are really important reasons why we take care of ourselves, and it is for our children's benefit. Yeah. So it's just a longer version of put your own oxygen mask on first. But I really like that story. I think it's really powerful.
It really is, yeah. You've given us lots of really practical examples and the ways that PACE might look on the ground. I wonder if you had any anecdotes or stories with working with educators where they've used this successfully.
Yes, I mean, obviously lots. It's kind of deciding what to talk to you about, really. And there's several things that come to mind. I want to talk about a school that I'm supporting at the moment in England called Nurture Learning, And it's a very small school, and it's set up for children who are failing in mainstream schools because of emotional and social difficulties. And, you know, wonderful group of staff who have come together and are really taking these ideas on mind. These ideas on board, offering a very paceful DDP type experience to the children, and just seeing those children settle and flourish. And, you know, I was thinking of one girl in particular, you know, when you shared that you would ask me this question. So I was thinking, what, you know, and I was thinking of a young girl who was 14, 15 when she came into that school, and, you know, really having a tough time. She'd had a difficult history, you know, of being parented herself. You know, she'd failed in mainstream school. Her learning was really compromised. She was very underachieving. And I suppose what really impressed me with the staff is how they could focus on her social and emotional support, and how they didn't get preoccupied by, we've got to teach this girl. Yeah, we've got to get the education in. Actually, this child isn't in a place to be educated at the moment, and feeling able to give her the time and space she needed to feel safe in school, to build the relationships, to improve her emotional well-being, and then to see her start to flourish and to move towards qualifications and all the things that we want for a child in school, which she would never have got without that initial. So I was thinking of her, so she came to mind. I was also thinking of the example I give in the book of a young boy that I worked with, and the way that, you know, he and his parent, his mother, could use that parenting in the moment, you know, to help him manage a difficult moment in school, and how that led to, I won't go through the whole story, it is in the book if people want to read it, which is a cheeky way of getting people to buy the book, of course. But, you know, the way that the mother taking time to sit with him and support him and truly understand him led him to, well, I want to make it right with my friends, and can I do this? And he came up with his own solution. It was just beautiful, you know. So, you know, with his permission, I use that story quite a lot in my writings and in my teaching. So just the power of relationship, really, to achieve what we want to achieve, but we try and get there too quickly.
Yeah, just thinking about what you were saying, Kay and I have just been working on a paper about early childhood settings, you know, and the kind of importance of safety and trust. And in many ways, with some of the older kids, you're trying to kind of recreate a lot of those experiences, isn't it, that perhaps they haven't had enough of. And often the dilemma for particularly the adolescent children is about how do you, you know, how are you able to do that while still kind of, you know, interacting with them in this sort of age appropriate kind of way. And I think PACE kind of bridges that quite well. Did you have any thoughts about what that looks like with adolescents, Kim?
Well, what was coming to my mind as you were talking about is the children going back to school after the lockdown we've just been in. And I don't know quite what it's like for you in Australia, but we've had very long lockdowns and long periods out of school. And, you know, there's a lot of preoccupation, you know, particularly for the adolescent age group who are needing to get their qualifications, they're going to do their GCSEs and those sorts of things, and, you know, how we help them catch up. And there's a big debate going on at the moment, you know, with, you know, the government really pushing for, we've got to catch up their education for these children. Maybe we should use the summer holidays to help them catch up, and, you know, things like that. And so we say, whoa, slow down. These kids are frightened. You know, these kids are coming back into school after a period of, you know, being confined to home and being told there's a bear at your door. You know, there's something really dangerous out there. And now we're saying, go to school and catch up on your learning. Hey, you're missing some steps here. Yeah. And we need, for adolescents, it's just as important as for younger children, that we need to attend to their emotional safety and their social safety. We need to help them integrate back into schools. We need to help them, you know, integrate back into their peer groups, which they've mainly connected with in this way for all these months, you know. And, you know, for some children, that's been a huge relief. It's taken some of the pressures off of struggling, especially the children we're talking about with the relational traumas. And now we're saying, go back into school and get back into all of that. And there's still the bear out there. This is still a scary world. So if we don't attend to the social and emotional needs of our adolescents just as much as we do for our young children, they're not going to achieve their education. If we do attend to it, they'll catch up, because when we're in the right state, we learn, we have a thirst for learning, and they will achieve what they need to achieve. And that isn't understood always. Yeah, there are a lot of good teachers out there who really understand it, but I know in the UK, I'm not sure our government get that at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting how a lot of that is lost when you're thinking about, big groups of people. It just feels like even with the COVID response in a certain way, there wasn't necessarily a lot of thought about, the mental health and the anxiety and everything, which has really skyrocketed. But yeah, it's interesting that it's, never a key feature about how you manage things.
And that's understandable. Crisis came, we had to deal with it quickly. And just like, in my model, the first thing you have to do is attend to the immediate danger. There is a knock-on effect though. And we do know that adolescent suicides are going up at the moment, for example. We do know mental health has been compromised. And as we ease out of this pandemic, we must attend to this. Yeah, and it's easy to say, oh, everything's normal again, get the kids back into school, get them catched up on their learning, we'll be fine. And actually, no, these kids have been through some awful trauma through this pandemic, whether it's touched them personally or whether they've just watched it on the news and heard about it. We've all been affected by the trauma of this, and obviously some children in a very, very personal way. They've lost parents, they've lost family members. So yeah, it's a really good example of working with huge trauma, isn't it? We're talking about relational trauma, but this is trauma that's impacted on all of us, and we're going to help these children go back to school. We've got to do it in a safe, emotionally healthy way. We have an opportunity to look after the mental health of our children and adolescents.
Well, that's a nice reframe. Yeah, I was wondering about PACE, and I know here in Australia, there's quite a lot of training around DDP now and a lot of awareness of it. What are your thoughts about when it's perhaps not used in the right spirit, or perhaps when it kind of isn't used the way it should be, do you think, particularly in like a school context?
Oh, thank you for the question. That's a really helpful question. Even in your use of language there, if you noticed, you weren't capturing the attitude. Yeah, is it being used properly? It's not something we use. It's a way of being, and that's where the misunderstanding comes in most clearly. When people think, okay, I want to learn PACE because then I can change behaviour. I'm going to use PACE as a technique. They haven't got it. They haven't understood it. And if you're using PACE as a technique, you're not being paceable because your acceptance isn't high enough. So you're immediately not paceful. So it's helping people understand that PACE is a way of being. It's an attitude. It's not something we do. It's not something we use. It's something we are. And that's the biggest thing we all try and communicate when we're doing our kind of PACE trainings and DDP trainings, which obviously include PACE, is helping people to get, this is an attitude. You haven't got a goal in mind, you've got a relationship in mind. It's an attitude that will help me connect with you. And then my goals can be attended to, but the attitude isn't attended to the goal. The attitude is the relationship. That's what PACE is. So noticing the way you talk about it is quite important. And we all slip into it. I used it, I did it, actually, no, you embodied the attitude of PACE. That was your way of being. And that's, if we can start using that language, it will help people understand it more deeply, I think.
As a kind of set of values and beliefs almost, isn't it? It's not something you switch on and switch off all day.
Yes. So people say, oh, did you use your PACE? Or, it is something we switch off from, because it's hard. It's hard to stay in that paceful attitude, because it does rely on our nervous systems being regulated and us to be in an open and engaged, not a defensive state. And you know, your listeners may be interested in polyvagal theory and Stephen Portis's idea to understand, which I know we don't have time to discuss today, but to understand more fully. And that is really, really difficult. I know, you know, in my own experience with, you know, challenges for my own children, how quickly it is to become defensive and not have a paceful attitude. And yet, if we can ground ourselves, regulate ourselves, and be paceful, how differently it all goes. I do want to acknowledge it's really hard, and for teachers in a classroom with a lot of children, some children triggering them because she just reminds me of my sister, yeah, and oh, I just feel like this when she looks at me that way, you know. Taking care of your own nervous systems when you're also got all those tasks to do in school is really, really tricky. So again, it comes back to staff well-being, and it comes back to support, and it comes back to the importance of times for reflection. Yeah, so in the book, which I do have here, this is the one we've been talking about, you know, in here I've got a little example of Mrs. K. I've just made her up, but obviously she's based on many experiences, and, you know, and Mrs. K is really triggered by Lucy, and it means that she doesn't slow down, she doesn't understand what's going on. You know, she does go in a way that's not helpful, and then she realizes and she thinks about it and reflects on it, and then she's able to meet Lucy where Lucy needs to be met. And it's just an example I put in here just to try and show that this is complicated because we have our own stuff activating us.
That's great. I am aware of the time. You've been very generous with your time and energy. Kay, did you have any thoughts before I wrap things up?
No, nothing to add other than to say thank you for being so wonderful in enabling, I guess, us as educators to be able to put this, you know, all these concepts into, for want of a better description, to be able to hold them in our hands and actually have substance to ideas that we read, because we often read things and it says, you know, what you should be doing, and yes, and you go, yes, I should be, but how do I actually do that? How do I build trust? How do I sort of acquire and let paceful behavior be so embedded that I cease to think about it intentionally because it's just who I am? How do I actually do that? You know, and it helps us not to go, oh, there's another thing, and dismiss it.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, so thank you. From an educator's point of view, it means the world to be able to, I guess, have these concepts, and I guess I can only explain it that way, that I can actually hold them and then take them into the room and make a difference. Thank you.
And can I just mention my colleague's book as well?
Sure.
This is Sian Phillips, who worked on this book with me alongside Louise Bomber. She's also worked on this book with Denny Mellim, and Dan supported them as well. Denny's a teacher, and it's belonging, a relationship-based approach for trauma-informed education, all infused by the DDP model. And it, you know, just listening to what you were saying about, you know, just the kind of, how do I do this? There's practical stuff in this book. Is
excellent.
amazing.
That book, I've got that one too. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's got such, it just brings it to life. It brings the classroom to life. It brings the children to life, and really shows the principles being put into practice. So I just wanted to kind of plug that one as well. That one.
Yes, thank you.
Love to have Sian on as well.
I'm sure she'd love to. Yeah,
sounds good. Kim, was there anything else that you'd like to direct our listeners to, any other resources or how they can learn more about yourself?
I've probably given them enough there, haven't they? There is a DDP website, ddpnetwork.org, and there's lots of resources on there. So it's definitely worth that. So, you know, if people are interested in these ideas and thinking, probably a first stop is to go to that website and browse the library. There's so many resources in the library, including some, you know, video webinar things, and, you know, Dan talking, John Valen talking. Yeah, I think there's some stuff of mine on there. So yeah, people, that's probably a good starting point. And they can contact us through that website as well if they want to be guided further.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. I was just saying before, I'd been to one of your trainings, I think a few years ago. So it's lovely hearing you talk again. Always inspirational and really practical. So thank you, Kim.
Oh, you're welcome. You're very
Yes,
welcome.
thanks very much.